Just days ago, everything seemed under control. The strait was open. Ships were moving. Now more than 20 tankers have been stopped, turned back, or forced out. And what's unfolding isn't just tension. It's something far more unstable. Just days ago, there was a sense of relief. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical waterways in the world, was open again. Ships were moving, traffic was flowing, and for a brief moment, it felt like the pressure was easing. But that moment didn't last. Now, the same waters tell a very different story. More than 20 vessels have already been disrupted. Some were turned back, others were redirected, and the flow that once looked stable is starting to break apart. Because something changed, and it changed fast. Iran has begun restricting vessel traffic through the strait. At the same time, a U.S. naval blockade is already in place. Two forces operating in the same narrow corridor, both enforcing control. The result is not coordination, it's overlap, and that overlap is creating something far more dangerous. Ships entering the strait are now receiving direct radio warnings, clear instructions, turn back. Iranian naval forces are declaring the waterway closed to all traffic, not partially restricted, not delayed, closed. But that's only one side of the story. Because at the same time, U.S. enforcement actions are also redirecting vessels, which means ships aren't just facing one barrier, they're facing two. And this is where things start to become unpredictable. Because when both sides impose restrictions, in the same space, there's no clear path forward. Okay, Dom, everything slows down. Then it stops, and that's exactly what is beginning to happen. But what makes this situation even more unusual is how quickly it reversed. Just days earlier, Ryan had signaled something completely different. Navigation through the strait was described as a completely open. There was a temporary ceasefire, a sense of de-escalation, a fragile agreement tied to tensions elsewhere. And for a moment, it seemed to be holding. Ships resumed movement. Confidence started to return. The system began stabilizing, but something didn't hold. That agreement is now unraveling. And instead of easing pressure, it has exposed something deeper. Because now both sides are maintaining restrictions, not sequentially, but simultaneously. And when that happens, the waterway doesn't just slow down, it starts to choke. Traffic becomes uncertain. Movements become hesitant. Decisions become delayed. Ship owners are no longer sure what to expect, and that uncertainty spreads quickly. Because in a place like this, hesitation has consequences. Some vessels have already been redeployed outside the region. Others are waiting, holding position, avoiding the risk entirely. And slowly the number of available tankers in the Middle East is shrinking, not because they're gone, but because they're staying away. And that changes everything. Because even if the route technically exists, if ships refuse to use it, the system still breaks down. But the situation isn't just about restrictions. There's something else happening beneath the surface. Security risks are rising. Reports indicate multiple attacks on commercial vessels in recent days. Not isolated incidents, but repeated actions. Shipowners are reporting gunfire, direct threats. Moments where routine navigation turns into something far more dangerous. And then something even more concerning. Two Indian-flagged vessels were attacked near the Strait of Hormuz, one of them carrying a massive load, a very large crude carrier, transporting 2 million barrels of Iraqi crude. That's not a minor disruption. That's a signal, because when vessels of that scale are targeted, it sends a message across the entire shipping network, and that message is simple. This route is no longer predictable. India is now preparing a diplomatic response. Which adds another layer to an already fragile situation. Because now it's not just about two primary sides, other countries are being pulled into the tension, and that expands the risk. Meanwhile, messaging from Washington suggests something different. Progress in talks, diplomatic movement, signs of possible resolution. But on the water, none of that is visible. Ships are still being turned back, warnings are still being issued, and restrictions are still in place. So there's a gap between what is being said and what is actually happening, and that gap creates confusion. Because for ship owners, traders, and operators, they don't respond to statements, they respond to reality. And right now, the reality is uncertain. Because even if progress is being discussed, it hasn't translated into safety, it hasn't restored confidence. And it hasn't reopened the route in any meaningful way. So ships wait, or they leave, and as they do, the pressure builds. Because the Strait of Hormuz is not just another waterway, it's a critical passage, and when access becomes limited, even slightly, the impact spreads far beyond the region. Markets are already reacting. There was a sharp sell-off recently, but that reaction may not reflect the full picture. Because if physical constraints continue, if ships remain blocked, delayed, or unwilling to enter, then the situation could shift again. Traders may be forced to reassess, to reprice, to adjust expectations based on reality, not assumptions. And that's where the real tension lies. Because right now, nothing is fully stable. The strait remains under Iranian control. Access is limited to vessels cleared by its authorities. At the same time, external enforcement continues to influence movement. 2 layers of control, 1 narrow passage, and no clear resolution. Everything appears operational, but restricted, open, but controlled, active, but unstable. And that combination is difficult to manage. Because systems like this depend on clarity, predictability, consistency. But what's happening here is the opposite. Conditions are shifting, signals are conflicting, and decisions are being made in real time without certainty, which means every movement becomes a risk calculation. Every entry into the strait becomes a question, and every delay adds pressure to a system that was already fragile. Because even small disruptions in a place this important can lead to much larger consequences. And the longer this continues, the harder it becomes to restore normal flow. Because once confidence is lost, it doesn't return instantly. It rebuilds slowly, and only when the risk disappears. But right now, the risk isn't disappearing, it's evolving. The ceasefire that once created optimism is no longer holding. The restrictions that were expected to ease are now tightening, and the stability that seemed possible is slipping away. Everything looked normal until it wasn't, and now the question isn't just about what is happening, it's about what happens next. Because if both sides continue enforcing control, if ships continue to stay away, if attacks continue to occur, then this may not be a temporary disruption. It may become something far more prolonged and far more serious. So the real uncertainty isn't what we're seeing now, it's what this leads to. Because when a critical route starts to close, even partially, the effects don't stay contained. They spread, gradually at first, then all at once. And right now, we're still in the early phase, where signals are mixed and outcomes are unclear. But the direction feels different. Because this isn't just tension, it's pressure building inside a system that cannot afford to break. And the longer it holds, the more fragile it becomes. So the question remains,